Welcome to Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the company behind this podcast and other great programs, like Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, which provides $2,000 cash scholarships to third-year law students and internships to second-year law students, along with leadership training and mentors. And Journey to Esquire, the blog, which provides insightful articles to help navigate you through law school and beyond. Find out more on our website, www.journeytoesquire.com. Hey, it's Jocelyn Hardrick, founder of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the nonprofit behind this podcast, and Journey to Esquire, the blog, and Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program. I'm so excited. We have a friend of mine who's come to visit us. We're going to pass the mic to Debbie Sines Crockett. Mm-hmm. Debbie is a shareholder at Sheffy Pasadomo, PA, and she practices in their Tampa office and concentrates in construction disputes and litigation, insurance coverage matters, commercial civil litigation from trial level all the way through appeal in both state and federal courts. She represents policyholders of all types of insurance policies against carriers with an emphasis in complex insurance issues, including denials, claim rep, risk transfer mechanisms, and both first and third party bad faith and extra-contractual claims. But before she was at this firm, she was an equity partner at Boyle, Gentle, Leonard, and Crockett, PA in Fort Myers. She's also really involved in bar activities, and she's the current chair of the American Bar Association, RPTE section, Property, Casualty, and Other Non-Title Insurance Committee, the current co-chair of the Florida Bar Reptile section, which is real property and estate planning and other things like that. That section's Insurance and Surety Law Committee, and she's a past chair of the Hillsborough County Bar Association Construction Law section. She's also a past co-chair of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association Insurance Law Committee and a board member of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Tampa Bay, which we will be celebrating later when we talk a little bit about a recognition they had recently. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. One of the first times we met, you mentioned that you do these podcasts, so I've been waiting patiently for the invitation. So I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy we were able to get a time together because we haven't seen each other in person in a while, right? So
the time goes by so quickly.
It does. I know. I remember our lunch too. I was thinking fondly about it and how we just connected, and I was like, yay! I always love meeting great people in Tampa Bay and people who have similar stories as I do. So let's go back in time a little bit and hear about your journey to Esquire. Tell us why you wanted to be a lawyer.
So I feel like my earliest memory of my mom saying, Debbie, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then she would name off some things. So that always felt like the limitation of choices. At the time, I didn't think it was a limitation, but she would say, do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be an engineer? Those were my three choices, all growing up. That's what I thought my three choices were. And part of that, I think, is coming from an Asian household. I'm Korean American. And so really, my mom didn't finish second grade. So to her, those were the three things to be as a professional and being able to send her children to college and things like that. So out of those, I used to think I wanted to be a doctor. And then I realized how hard biology and chemistry and organic chem. And then I was like, oh no. And I was never, honestly, even though I'm Asian, I was never much of a math student. So I just gravitated toward political science and English and history. And then before I know it, I was like, oh, I guess this lawyer thing's going to work out. And so after majoring in political science and debating whether to go to grad school or law school, it just seemed like kind of the natural thing to apply to law school. And that's actually how I became a lawyer. When I applied to law school, I don't think I had ever actually met a judge or a lawyer ever before. All I knew was what I watched on TV. So like LA Law, like that was my, that was what I understood. My mom loved Perry Mason. So Perry Mason, Matlock in the 80s. So that was my frame of reference. I had no idea what being a lawyer meant. Now, of course I do.
Yeah. And you're a very successful lawyer, very busy, and you're really good at what you do. So that's what I meant. That's my story too, right? My mom's like lawyer, doctor. I think especially for immigrant parents who come to the US, they like concrete things. They know what lawyers do. They go to court, they file papers. They know what engineers do. They build and design. They know what doctors do. They help people when they're sick and with their health. And so it's interesting how parents plant that seed and then it just takes hold, right?
It
So
does.
yeah, and that's interesting. You said your mom did not complete second grade. You want to tell us a little more about that?
Sure. My mom is now 87, and so she had me later in life, and we emigrated to the US in 1975. But growing up, my mom was the youngest of six, and she was orphaned at a very early age because, also being the youngest of six, her parents were older. And I think her mother was her father's second wife. And so once she was orphaned, by the time she was 5, she went from sister kind of to sister to brother kind of living. And so her next oldest sister is 2 years older than her. The two of them kind of stuck together. But because at that time, when my mom was very young, Japanese occupation of Korea was still in existence. So when she did have the opportunity to go to school, which was a little bit for second grade, she was forced to learn Japanese. So she never actually was formally educated in Korean. And of course, then the Korean War happens, and she hitched a ride and found an American GI, and hitched a ride and made it to the United States. And so, not that this is a podcast about immigration, but it always irks me when people say, "Oh, well, people from other countries, if they did it the legal way, if they did it the right way, then that's okay." Well, what does the right way mean to you? Does that mean finding the first available American, who you can hitch on to come to the US? Is that really the right legal way? Is that what you mean? Or is it being at the border and asking for asylum, right? Because that's a legal proper way. So, it always irks me when people say that, because they just don't understand, I think, the true immigrant experience.
Yes, and I agree with you. There are a lot of ways to come into the United States. There's a lot of ways to immigrate, and there's a lot of reasons why people do it. And so, once we're here and we find these legal pathways and we try to establish ourselves, a lot of immigrants and children of immigrants do become very productive parts of the American society and been contributing here for a very long time. So I was, being transparent with you earlier, like we haven't had a lot of Asian podcast members. We've had a few, but I always want people to share their individual stories, no matter how many times someone has told some version of it, because your story is your own. So I'm so grateful that you would share that story with us. It's very touching. So now you're definitely first generation lawyer. It sounds like first generation maybe college.
My older sister is first generation college, and she's a little bit older than me. But I am the first to go to any postgraduate school, right? So, and then since then, my sister's obtained a master's degree, but my sister was the first to go to college, for sure, yeah.
Oh, okay. But that still counts because you're the first generation. We're looking at generations, but that is a huge accomplishment for a woman who's only had second grade education in her home country to raise two young women who are able to get advanced degrees. We're a part of a group of very few people in the world who have advanced degrees. I have to remind my students of that. Sometimes we're so caught up and surrounded by abundance and people doing well, we forget that in the world, most people don't have that access and that experience.
Well, so that's very true. I remember in high school, so it was always same thing with the careers, lawyer, doctor, engineer. My mom always said, okay, so where do you want to go to college? And, there's no internet. I can't just Google colleges. And so all I know is what's local around me. And I grew up in Maryland, so no frame of reference beyond what I see. And I didn't have any, other than my older sister, nobody else to say, oh, well, you should try this college or go here. I had no idea about where any colleges or universities were. But I distinctly remember many of my friends in high school who were in classes with me and I had grown up with were not going to college. And I remember being shocked, like, well, what are you going to do with your life? Because to me, there was, again, no other option than to go to college. I didn't think or even consider anything like military, trade school, whatever, because it was always drilled into my head. You're going to college. So it was almost like I had no other choice. It seemed like the natural step for every one of my friends, my peers, but many of them didn't. Many did, but many didn't go to college. So.
Yeah, so the influence of our parents, again, when they come here, they see where we're from, this is not even an option for most people. So now that it's an option, they want to plant the seed early. And so now you're in college, I'm guessing. Is that when you applied for law school?
Yes. So again, debating between going to graduate school I was thinking about like public policy or international policies. Oh, I've always been interested in politics, and between that and law school. And then I thought, well, if I went master's program, it's only 2 years, but then the next thing after that is PhD. If I go just to law school, I'll be done in 3. So
That's a lot of people's analysis, to be honest. As a law professor, when I talk to people, why do you want to go law? They're like, it was 3 years and I'll have a terminal degree. Like, hey, if that works for you. But as we found out, it's a tough 3 years, even though it's a shorter 3 years. So, how did you decide where to apply? Because by now you have a little more information about law schools. You can't just go to the local school necessarily because you got to get into the law school. What is your application process like?
I had a friend who I knew from high school who was a year older than me, and he was also applying to law school. So one of the things we were doing, I learned a lot from him because we were kind of going through it together, and he explained a lot of the things, including taking the LSAT and did a review course for LSAT and all of that. And in the application process, I only applied, well, actually I applied to, because I grew up in Maryland, the Washington, D.C. schools. And then I applied to the 2 Maryland law schools, which was University of Maryland and University of Baltimore. That's it. And even in the DC schools, it's not like I applied to Georgetown, right? I didn't have my LSAT scores. I couldn't go to Georgetown. So I applied, I think, as I recall, GW, and I forget the name of their law school. I think it's American University Law School. I forget. Anyway, so GW, I applied to, I think it's Washington, D.C. I forgot the name of it now, but at the time, they were not accredited. And so that law school, and then Maryland and University of Baltimore, and there may have been one other law school, maybe Loyola in DC. I remember I only got accepted to 2. So the one, I think it's University of DC, again, I can't remember the name, but the one in DC that was not accredited, they were waiting to be accredited. They accepted me, which now I understand they probably accepted everybody who came to their school, right? Because they were trying to get accreditation. And then University of Baltimore. At the time, and I don't know if it's different now, but at the time, and I started law school in 1996. At the time, University of Baltimore was considered the more practical school, and University of Maryland was considered the theoretical school. And actually more politicians and famous people, if you will, sort of famous, went to University of Baltimore. So I really didn't have a choice. I got accepted into that school in DC, not accredited, which I did not understand until I got accepted and got the letter that said they're not accredited, and University of Baltimore. So by default, I went to University of Baltimore. So,
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there's still schools now that are in formation and various, issues with accreditation. And I'll let you Google that for students who are listening, like, what does that mean? Look that up because it may impact your decision the way it impacted Debbie's. So now you're in law school, you're in the more practical school, as you said. What is your experience like? Do you like law school? Is it like everything you thought it would be? Is it completely different? What is it like?
I think my experience going into law school right out of college with no break and no, a lot of people go get master's degree or go out and work and that kind of thing. To me, it was just another extension of college, sort of, but more difficult. And so I'm still in that mindset of like college mindset. But then I knew I had to buckle down in my first year. I actually did really well in my first year, top 10%, and which was to me amazing. My own, like I did not expect that because I did struggles hard, but I worked harder than I had ever worked before. In college, I didn't work that hard, and it was fine. High school, yeah, it was fine. But then that first year in law school, I worked harder than I ever worked. I actually had to really think about how to teach myself to study and what worked for me and what didn't work for me. And I learned that at that point in time, I was really a person who needed to take notes. And laptops are just coming out. Like people are just having their own laptops in school. And so it's not like even if you had your laptop in school, you couldn't get on the internet, right? So I still all old fashioned wrote out all my notes. And then I learned that what worked for me was rewriting my notes and creating my outlines and then condensing it till we got to midterms or finals. And so I had to teach myself how to study. So it worked out great that first year. Then after that first year, once I made top 10%, again, ignorance. I was ignorant. I did not realize that I should have applied for law review. but I was lazy and I never applied for law review. I didn't understand the importance of it. But then I learned later that if you were in the top 10% and you applied for law review, you were going to get on to law review. But I missed that opportunity because I never applied because, again, I was lazy. Instead, I guess I always thought I would be a litigator. Instead, I applied to do moot court, and I was on a moot court team. So no one cares, honestly, later, maybe they do, that you were on a moot court team. But and I did not realize, because I never did a moot court in high school, it wasn't available. I didn't even know what it was. I thought it was like trial work. Well, then I learned it was appellate argument. Okay, so again, totally ignorant, not knowing anything. Remember, guys, I'm in my early 20s, right? I have no idea, and Google doesn't exist. Well, just came into being, right? Like recently. Had just started. I just started getting emails, having an EDU account when I graduated from college. Like that was, so you couldn't just Google stuff. So information is at your fingertips now that was not available before. So just completely ignorant and didn't have anybody to tell me to had been through this. I didn't even know any lawyers to ask. And perhaps you're saying, well, Debbie, you should have sought out a mentor. Yeah, but that wasn't a thing then either. Like, yeah, you could find somebody to help, but the whole mentor and mentee, by the way, mentee is not a real word, but okay, it just didn't exist. You just, so you just had to figure it out, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and figure it out. And so I guess I figured it out okay. But I do think that I'm behind. I feel like I'm behind in where I should be by about 5 years, like in my career and my experience level and where I am even now after having practiced for 20 years. I feel like I'm about 5 years behind others, maybe just based on my own ignorance at the time. And I don't think I can overcome it, and I think I have overcome it, but I do wish I had a few more trials under my belt. I wish I had, done some more of those things. But overall, law school is kind of a blur. I remember college much better, the 4 years in college, and I remember high school very vividly, but law school is a blur. It's such a blur that, my practice area includes insurance. And I remember when I started doing this, and no one said I didn't wake up and say, I'm going to start reading insurance policies all day long and interpreting things. No, that was not, I was going to, truth, justice, and the American way, right? I was going to go make the world a better place. So I still am hopeful of that someday in the back of my mind. But law school is such a blur that I was cleaning out my filing cabinet a couple years ago. It's probably been about 5 years. I was cleaning it out, and I found my report cards, the hard copy of my report cards from law school. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I started opening them up. I actually have no recollection, but apparently I took insurance law in law school, and I got a B. But I have no recollection. I can't tell you anything about that class. I don't remember showing up to that class. I don't remember the books. I don't remember anything about it, but I got a B and I took it. So law school is a blur.
Wow, really interesting. And then, usually it's like all of schooling is a blur, but it's for some reason your brain is like, nope, I do not want to remember that time period.
I don't know why. I have distinct memories, with the Socratic method in
Yeah.
school. I do have distinct memories of not being able to answer questions and that feeling.
Hmm.
So I remember those moments, and just being at the time, I guess in my first year, I was more on top of it. But in my second and third year, at the same, when I got called on and I just didn't have the answer, I hadn't briefed the cases, I was not prepared. I felt more of a sense of embarrassment than I think I would have my first year, because now I'm a little bit older. Now I'm thinking about, okay, am I going to take the bar exam? Because there for a while I was thinking I didn't want to. Having a JD was going to be enough. And when I started law school, I was thinking I'm going to go into politics, so all I need is JD. I don't need Esquire. I don't need to be admitted into any bar. Well, I quickly figured out for myself, well, that's just silly. You went through all of that school. It was so hard. You might as well just and if I decide to use it in practice, great. But if I don't, okay too, but I'll have it available to me. So that's ultimately how I decided to take the bar exam.
Wow. Yeah, and that's why this is called Journey to Esquire, because we always want the students to just go all the way. You never know. And we need people licensed, ready to represent individuals. And it doesn't mean you're going to be Matlock and Perry Mason in court all the time. It could mean, an appeal. It could mean show up in a traffic court. It could mean a family law case, just helping someone out or guarding ad litem. Or it could be like you thought you wanted to do one thing and you end up doing something else. But I also want to stop and just give you credit. You keep saying you were ignorant, you were ignorant. I mean, you've overcome a lot. You
But
knew no lawyers and judges showed up to law school unaware and gotten the top 10%. So I think you should give yourself a lot more credit
thank
for
you.
not it's okay that you didn't know. But that's why we have programs like Journey to Esquire now to help students, especially like you. Like I went in clueless. I had to have people explain to me what law review, like what is that and why would I do extra work?
Right. Why would I do that? Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
so this program, like Journey to Esquire, I am so in awe of what you do and how you help students because such programs did not exist, right? I do remember in law school where the vendors would come to sign you up. Of course, Lexus was there and all the bar review. And then, of course, the JAG was there. But I don't remember there being any other types of vendors for any other voluntary bar associations or that kind. I didn't know those types of things existed. So, for instance, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association, APABA, the national one, the national one, which also includes Canada, came into existence I think it was in the early 90s, early to late 90s. And so remember, I started law school in 96. So now you're talking about lawyers who are getting together. They are not even really yet thinking about law students, right? So the idea that there would be a voluntary bar like that welcomes law students, one, didn't exist. And two, I don't remember any reach outs from the local bar associations either in Maryland. Now here, I know, at least in Hillsborough County, they welcome student members, right? And all of the bar associations do. And now the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association has a whole student division, of course. And they have a moot competition and all kinds of things for students. And now there is NAPOLSA, which is, and I'm not sure when they came into existence, but it's the National Asian Law Students Association. Again, no such thing existed. So taking advantage of a program and you making it available to students like Journey to Esquire to answer those questions like, how important really is law review? Do I have a chance to actually get onto law review? Will people actually care about that when you put on your resume law review? Yeah, actually, people pay attention to that. Again, like you said, I was ignorant, had no clue. Now I know. So that's why I think this program that you've put together for Journey to Esquire, I'm just amazed by it. I'm in awe by it. And every student should take advantage of it.
Thank you for that plug. And those who can't, we have the podcast so we can reach people nationally. So now let's go to you're graduating, you've decided you're taking the bar exam. What is this finding your first job like?
So interestingly, my first job after I finished law school was actually with the city of Baltimore. I worked in their as an economic development officer. And actually, if anybody's in Baltimore listening to this now or visits Baltimore, the entire Hippodrome Center, the west side of Baltimore, near the law school there, University of Maryland, that was all very blighted in that whole entire area. So I worked on the redevelopment of that. If you go there now, it's completely different. It's amazing what's been done there. I learned a lot about eminent domain during that job. I did not work with the city attorney's office, but I assisted them in more of a side role because part of my job was development, right? And so unfortunately, part of my job there was to actually help the city use its power of eminent domain to go gather up properties for this redevelopment. So I learned a lot about that and also how economic development works for the city. And I actually did that job because they were specifically looking for somebody who was Asian American. And the reason for that was because, and particularly Korean, because there are a lot of Korean business owners that were being affected by the eminent domain process. And so I hate to say it, but I was their token. I was their kind of their poster child, sort of. And I was the one they pushed out into the community to have to go tell these business owners that the city's coming and the wrecking ball's coming, right? So it put me in a very precarious position because of the business owners. I learned a lot from it. It was a great experience. And then I realized, and at that time I hadn't sat for the bar exam yet. So I learned quickly that, okay, in order to be more effective, and also I'm young too, so people taking me seriously, but also to be more effective, I needed to really have Esquire behind my name. So, but my first job then after I got admitted in Maryland was, because at that point desperate's not the right word, but I'm looking for anybody like to hire me, and I'm not sure where I want to go, but I know I want to be a trial lawyer. I did know that. And by default, I just took a lot of trial advocacy classes in law school. And so I was what's called a Rule 16 in Maryland, which is a CLI. So does it stand for?
Certified Legal Intern.
Right, in Florida. So in Maryland, I was a Rule 16 student attorney at the Public Defender's Office. So I did that for an entire semester. I loved it. And then I applied once I've passed the bar, I have applied now to both the state's attorney's office and the public defender's office. And it didn't matter to me which one got back to me first. State's attorney's office got back to me first. And then that's how I had my first legal job, was at the state's attorney's office in Baltimore City.
Oh, wow. So now what year is it? Because, people who've watched, The Wire and some other shows about
Yep.
Baltimore during certain periods of time are kind of curious about, okay, what is it like being a prosecutor during that time?
Interestingly, it was exactly during that time when The Wire was being filmed that I was a prosecutor in Baltimore City. But I was oblivious. I didn't know at the time. I watched The Wire much later, actually after I moved to Florida in 2005. So 4. I didn't realize at the time. But for the many of those years, Baltimore had the highest murder count in the country. It was like 500 plus murders every single year. For those who are political junkies, Martin O'Malley, he ran for president a few years ago. Many years ago, but he ran for president. He was Baltimore City's mayor, and he used to be a former state's attorney. Actually, when I went to the state's attorney's office, I worked in the same district that he worked in, and Baltimore was a violent place at the time. The most interesting thing, as I recall, was that the juries never trusted the police. So as prosecutors, we had to overcome people's distrust of the Baltimore City Police Department. And it was very real. And it's probably still that way, I'm guessing, this many years later. I don't know, but it was a challenge because I left that job and I moved to Florida. And let me tell you where I moved to Florida. I moved to Florida into Naples. So if you don't know Naples, Naples is very conservative, very wealthy, kind of the polar opposite of Baltimore. Think about, like, if you hear people talk about Boca or like Palm Springs in California, right? Very, very expensive area and very conservative. So I pick up myself from Baltimore City and I come to Florida and I start practicing in Naples, Florida as a prosecutor. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, my caseload in Baltimore, I had, 300 files, 300 cases. I would try more than one case a day. It must be a cakewalk in Naples. And comparatively, it sort of was. The caseload's still heavy, right? It just means you have fewer attorneys, fewer state's attorneys handling those cases. So the caseload's still heavy. But the difference is everybody believes the police. Like the police, the words are, and I remember thinking, like, you believe the police? Like, oh, really? It was a total 180 for me. It was much easier as a prosecutor in Naples than it was in Baltimore City. So that was kind of a shift in my practice, but doing the same thing, but yet differently. And interestingly, Maryland at the time, possession of small amounts of cocaine, possession of even large amounts of marijuana, possession of small amounts of heroin were misdemeanors. Possession of certain types of guns were misdemeanors. I came to Florida, all of those are felonies. So it was very shocking too, the difference in the judicial systems.
Oh, yeah. And, for people who are because we have a young audience, The Wire was a TV show on HBO. You can catch it now, I think, on various streaming stations. It actually was a pretty well-produced show and well-written show, but it is about police officers investigating drug crime, and it's called The Wire because they were literally using a wire to tap these payphones. So that's how dated that is. But the stories themselves were really interesting, and you'll notice a lot of stars you see now in other things, like Idris Elba.
Idris Elba, yes, yeah. He's like the biggest star from that, yeah.
Yes, he is. I remember my husband, like, hearing him speak in his own accent. He said, "Why does he sound like that?" I'm like, "He's British." He just knew him from The Wire, right, with the Baltimore accent. Yeah, and second, generally speaking, all around the country, juries tend to believe law enforcement and people in positions of authority, but then you go to certain jurisdictions where they've had a long history of poor relationships between the community and law enforcement, like LA, Detroit, Baltimore. You'll have that. But generally speaking, juries typically give a lot of credibility and credence to testimony by law enforcement. So I just want to put that out there so people kind of have some context. So I don't know if you want to go into like the move from Maryland to Florida and all the things. If not, we can move on to how you transition into your current practice area, insurance. You want to do that?
Sure. So just a quick story about how I got here. My husband and I, kind of sight unseen, the only place we'd ever been was Orlando. we decided we were moving to Florida. We were both frustrated, and at the time the housing market was just like it. We sold our house and made a ton of money, and we were only there for a short time, and so we were looking at buying another house. Well, the sale fell through, and that's when we said, well, that's it. We threw our hands up and said, we're moving. We actually met a couple who had just recently moved to Naples. My husband and I were on a cruise, and our first cruise ever, and we met a couple who just recently moved from Chicago, and they told us all about Naples, and they had worked for the government, I guess the county government, and told us, oh, they were always hiring and that kind of thing. So we decided to move. Now, I was very hesitant because I didn't want to take another bar exam, and Florida has no reciprocity with any other state, and so I knew I would have to take the entire bar exam, the multi-state, and on top of that, the ethics exam was the MPRE. Maryland, you didn't have to take it at the time. Now you have to, so that's another exam I had to take and study for. So I just had to prepare myself to take another bar exam. It was dreadful. And I can't move to any other state. I can go to Maryland because I kept my license active, and I can live in Florida. Those are the only two states I can practice in. So
You can actually go to DC and Texas. They will waive you in after 5 years.
yes, I could waive into DC, and then I understand from there I could waive into like New York and some other jurisdictions, but that just requires a lot of paperwork. And remember, I told you earlier, I'm kind of lazy, so I just haven't done it.
Well, good thing it's been working out for you here. So how did you end up getting into insurance defense?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you like it. You've been doing it for a while now.
Yeah, so not insurance defense. So my
sorry,
practice is,
construction litigation. Sorry.
yeah, so my practice is I actually sue insurers.
Yeah.
Insurance companies. I represent policyholders. I did not, again, decide at any time in my life that I'm going to read insurance policies for a living. I knew I wanted to be a litigator, though, right? I left the state's attorney's office in Naples, frankly, because the pay was just atrocious. It was very hard to live off of a salary of state's attorneys or public defenders. And for those who do it and make it a career of it, my hat's off to them. It was just very difficult for me. And part of it is, I went to law school not to be poor, right? So
I mean, let's keep it real, right? I always tell students, because I teach criminal law, so they always wonder, should I be a prosecutor or a public defender? I'm like, it's a great job right out of law school, but you really have to look at the pay and what you're trying to do with your life, because financially it may not be able to support it. So that's why I recommend doing it right out of law school. Just keep living like a law student. But yeah, most people I know who've done it loved it, but left because of the pay issues.
yes, I loved it. I would, if they paid enough, I would go back and be a prosecutor now. In fact, I thought about trying to become a federal prosecutor or even a federal public defender. Even though I've worked as a prosecutor, I have no problem being a public defender, and people ask me a lot about that. And just really quick, for me, I have the same issue in civil practice, depending on what hat I'm wearing, which client I'm representing. And not that I'm arguing out of both sides of my mouth. That's not it. It's just a different perspective. And then on the defense side in criminal, it's not about whether the person, to me, it's not about whether the person did it or not. It's about making sure the government doesn't run rampant over you and impinge on your rights and your freedoms that we all have as Americans. So that's what being a criminal defense attorney is for me. If the pay were better, I would be doing it still. I would have never left. I love being in court. In fact, as a civil litigator, that's what I miss, because 99% of cases settle. And so what I miss the most is being in court, 4 days a week, being ready to try cases, picking juries. The last trial I had was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And it was great. I mean, I remember the closing argument, like in my head, it's such I really enjoy it. I know some people like jumping out of airplanes and that kind of thing. Going to trial, that's the adrenaline that I really enjoy, being in front of a jury. And because every time you have an argument with somebody, let's say your friend or your spouse, and you want to convince them you're right. And here it is, you have proof pudding that you were right. You convinced these jurors that you were right, and they found for your client. There is no better feeling to me as an attorney and litigator than that feeling, because now they've said I'm right, which I wish my husband would do more, right? I'm right. Look, proof. I'm right. So
I know every wife everywhere is like, yes. Someone to pick my side and say I was right.
Right. I can't convince my husband, but I've convinced these jurors, these complete strangers, that I'm right. So there's no better feeling than that. I love that so much. I transitioned, I guess, from criminal because again, I needed to find a job that paid better money, and that actually had a trajectory too. Because a lot of people are in the state's attorney's office and public defenders, let's face it, because they want to be judges. I don't want to be a judge. That's not my personal aspiration or goal. So I started working actually as a temp, and when I say a temp, literally a temp receptionist, because I'm trying to figure out where to be. I left the state's attorney's office without any other job. The pay was so bad. I was making more as a temp, answering the phones as a receptionist. So I was working with a headhunter, and I said, well, let me just go check out some of these offices. And I was, again, in the Southwest Florida area, so anywhere from Fort Myers to Naples. And I just bought a house, and the commute between Naples and Fort Myers was kind of tough. I had moved to the Fort Myers area. So I found this law firm, which at the time was looking for a receptionist. So I came in and I answered their phones for, I don't know, their receptionist had gone out on maternity leave. I didn't tell anybody I was a lawyer. I didn't tell anybody that I was licensed. I just answered the phones. And I did that for a few months. And then they offered me a permanent position as a receptionist because I'm really good at being a receptionist. And I said, I have to decline. And they're like, why? And I said, well, I'm actually a lawyer. And they're like, what? And so I explained the whole story, kind of what I explained to you, right? Like, I just needed to figure out where I wanted to be and what I was doing. And I didn't know what civil practice area I wanted to be in, other than I knew I wanted to litigate. I didn't even really understand at that time the difference between, because fast forward now, I'm 30. I didn't really understand the difference between like insurance defense and plaintiff work. Like, I don't know. I do know I'm not interested in family law. I do know I'm not interested in personal injury. Those two practice areas, but everything else kind of was like, I don't know. I have no idea. So this firm that I felt that I was receptioning at said, okay, well then why don't you work for us and let's try it out. Why don't you work kind of as a law clerk and kind of do some writing for us and things. And so I did while I was answering the phone, while they were only paying me a very small amount, which was still more than I was making at the state's attorney's office. So they got a really good deal. And then eventually they hired me on as a kind of a full associate. And then eventually I became a named partner at that firm. So I was with that firm in Fort Myers for 10 years, well, almost 10 years before I came to this firm. And that firm, they were doing a little of insurance defense work. And then they were also handling insurance coverage matters. And while I was there, I worked on a really big case, a seminal case with regard to insurance coverage in Florida. And I was not there when they did the trial, but I was there for the second DCA briefing, and I was there for the Florida Supreme Court briefing, and I actually was at oral argument at the Florida Supreme Court at the table with at the time, they became my partners, but with my bosses at the Florida Supreme Court at the table in front of the justices on this particular case, and we won. And that transformed that practice from not doing any insurance defense anymore to only dealing with insurance coverage disputes and matters. It changed the landscape. That case changed the landscape of construction and insurance all throughout the state of Florida. And that case came out in 2006. So once that firm's focus changed, it caused me to change because I was working there. So by default, I started doing insurance coverage, disputes, bad faith matters, suing insurance companies, right? That was what we did there. And that's what I still do today.
Oh, very nice. So sometimes you could just, stumble into a practice area and it could just be things completely out of your control. But if you lean into it, it can really work out.
Well, and that's what happened. I leaned into it. And once I leaned into it, I quickly realized people will start asking you because you know about it. Yeah. You're considered the specialist. So it happens on a small scale. So let's say in your firm, you're working as a law clerk or you come in as an associate and you're asked to do research. And this actually happened to me to do some research about how, let's say, some doctrine works. Like, tell me all about the tipsy coachman doctrine. If you don't know what that is, you guys can Google it. Tipsy coachman doctrine. Debbie, go figure out everything you know about and tell us all about it. How does it work? What do you do? When does it apply? And then all of a sudden, every time that issue comes up in your firm, they will come to you and say, hey, Debbie knows this. She's done this before. She can help you with that. And then within your firm, you become a sort of go-to person for that particular subject matter, right? It's very nuancey. It's very small, but it may come up again. So then that's what happened with my practice too, is that, okay, now with regard to insurance, and particularly for so hurricane claims, those types of things, but also construction. you become known basically as a specialist, even though you're not board certified, but it's such a nuanced area of the law, people come to you and ask you about these things. And so that's what happened, and that's how I then came to this firm where I'm currently at, Sheffield Passidomo, because I had worked as co-counsel with this firm on that very large case, because this firm had the construction piece of that case that went to the Florida Supreme Court, and my prior firm had the insurance part, and then we worked as co-counsel. So that case, so there's a second case actually. So there's a second case that when I was with my prior firm, we took it to trial in conjunction with my firm now. So the two firms worked together to try a case. Then it went to the second DCA. So then at the second DCA, the insurance firm handled the second DCA because it was all insurance matters. Then it went up to the Florida Supreme Court. It's the second case to go up to the Florida Supreme Court. I was here at this firm at that time, and we did all the briefing for the Florida Supreme Court on that case here at this firm. I represented the same guy, the same client, two different firms over the course of 14 years. So very interesting. Yeah.
So for our listeners, yes, litigation can take a long time. She said 14 years for one case.
Yes.
And for our listeners, a lot of people think lawyers know everything. We don't. We have to look it up. And once someone does, no one else wants to look it up. We're like, oh, so-and-so knows. So that's what she's talking about. But she became the expert in this one little field. And some lawyers do specialize. So that's what board certification is. But sometimes you just do something long enough that you just can rattle it off, and it becomes a lot easier for you to explain to someone else. And then people literally hire you just because you know how to do it, and you can help them with that piece. So that's what the co-counsel part is.
Right. So that helps with imposter syndrome. And I'm sure other people have talked about that. And I'm sure your listeners feel it, because I still feel it too. But when you become an expert, people come ask you, hey, how does this work? How does that doctrine work? Have you used that before? What's your experience on that? And you can actually knowledgeably answer the question. All of a sudden that helps relieve your imposter syndrome, at least with that subject matter. But then there'll be a second one. There'll be another one where that happens to you. And then all of a sudden you'll have a line at your door because people want to come talk to you and ask you about things. And then you're like, well, gosh, maybe I do know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm going to ask you for some advice that you'll offer to our listeners, but I know from our conversations, there's been the other side of imposter syndrome, right? Where people are planting the seeds of doubt. And you hear it so many times. At first, you're like, well, no, I know what I'm talking about. We took the same bar exam. But then, after a while, they start to become seeds of doubt if you hear it enough. What advice do you have for aspiring lawyers and law students?
One of the, or I think earlier I said, I feel like I'm about 5 years behind in, where I think I should be professionally. Part of that is the move I made from Southwest Florida to Tampa with a whole new community, if you will. But one of my biggest pieces of advice, which I wish someone had said to me, and maybe Journey to Esquire will help students to see this, is to get involved in bar associations, your local bar associations, as well as whatever state that you become admitted in. Start as a law student. And the reason I say this is because of the connections. I just told you the story about how I was co-counsel with my current firm, which led to me getting a job and being a partner in this new law firm where I've been now for 10 years. But in this law firm, it's all based on connections. And so I'm a firm believer in, I'm going to introduce you, Bob, to Joe, right? And maybe something will come of that introduction. It might not be in 5 minutes or a year, but it might be 2 years down the road. And then maybe Bob will refer Joe some really big case, right? And that helps both of them. So I'm a big believer in connecting people, even if it's not for my own benefit, but the way you do that is going out and meeting people in your bar associations, and particularly people in practice areas that are nothing like yours, because you need to refer clients who are looking for that need. If somebody came to me for a divorce, I need to know some really good family law attorneys to whom I can refer this potential client. And by the way, this client is important to me. They're a good client of mine. So I'm going to refer them to somebody who's good and that I trust, right? So I need to figure out who those people are. So that's how you do that, is by meeting people. And you get to meet people in bar associations, not only to refer them, but also, in the construction bar, for instance, there are many attorneys that I litigate against all the time. I have multiple cases against the same attorneys, but because I know them on a social level, I can pick up the phone more easily and say, hey, Diane, let's do this. Do you mind if we do this? Rather than it always being contentious. Don't get me wrong. There are some that you can try that with and it's still contentious. So those types of relationships you can foster through the bar associations, whether it's first at the local level, then at the state level, and then voluntary bar associations, affinity bars, which, there are so many, like the Women's Bar Association, of course, would be an affinity bar. And it's not that only women are allowed to be members. That's not it, right? So those things are very important that I wish I had known earlier in my career and I could have gotten involved in those because I'm making up for lost time. You read the different committees that I chair. And the ABA too, very, very large. Your state bar associations are very large. So if you start small with the young lawyer section and get to meet people, your peers, that's how you grow. And then those peers become leadership in other committees over the years and you get to know them and maybe even becomes a judge or Florida bar president or your state bar president or national organization president. And you get to say, oh, I know so-and-so, right? We're good friends. So that's one of my biggest pieces of advice to young lawyers. I know it's stressful to go to events, happy hours. You just need to come up and be brave and say, hey, I'm Debbie. I go to University of wherever. I'm a third year. No attorney that you introduce yourself to like that is going to turn your way. They can't wait to tell you their experience and their stories. They're going to welcome that. If you see somebody standing alone in a happy hour, go right up to him and say, hey, I don't know anybody here either. My name's Debbie. I'm getting ready to graduate, that kind of thing. Don't be afraid.
I tell my law students, I'm like, the lawyers love law students. People email me all the time, please send your students to this event. And the nice thing is it's not just happy hours now. There's volunteer opportunities, there's family gatherings, and like APABA of Tampa Bay is having its family picnic soon and had some great news recently. You want to share it with our listeners?
Yeah, so our affiliate organization, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Tampa Bay, was recently recognized by the National Association as Small Affiliate of the Year, and so we won an award for that. So we're very proud of that, and it's a pretty big accomplishment when you think the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association has over, I think the last count was 50,000 attorneys and law students and judges throughout the country. So pretty big achievement. And we're up against some really big cities, LA, Chicago, New York, and the Asian Pacific American first population in Florida. But also then when you say, okay, now attorneys, very small group. So we're very proud of it.
Yeah, and it's a great organization. Just like Debbie said, the Women's Lawyers Group is not just for women. I'm a member of APABA. I've been a member for a long time. I always recruit the students to be members, and they're very welcoming. They are a great group of folks, very non-pretentious, which is nice. And for those of you who may feel shy or overwhelmed by bigger organizations, starting with a small one is a great place to start because then you kind of get to know everyone. And any last words for our listeners before we sign off?
I think my last piece of advice for a new associate, so if you're getting a new job as a law clerk or an associate, is you may not know the law, but one thing you can know without having a law degree is you can know all the facts. You can figure out, okay, well, this is what happened. The car ran the red light and so, right? And then, okay, so who was driving the car? Who was the car registered to? Where did the accident happen? What time of day? You can know the facts about what happened and the case without having a law degree, right? If you can control that, and if a attorney comes to you, a partner comes to you and says, hey, can you tell me about that? You know everything. You know every single piece of paper. You don't need to know anything about the law, but you just need to know that. That is my second piece of advice to a law student who's clerking or a new associate who's coming into a firm, is you can control that. You don't have to have a law degree to know those things. And then you become the go-to on that file, right? So that's my second.
So know your value everywhere you go, because you can bring value even before you graduate, pass the bar, or anything else. That's some great advice. Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for sharing your journey to Esquire.
Thank you. I could talk for another 2 hours. So
we're gonna wrap it up here, though, but we'll have you come back. How about that?
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much for the invitation.
You're welcome. It was great chatting with you again, and thank you to our listeners. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another great episode of Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Support, share, subscribe. And for more, visit www.journeytoesquire.com.